The Pentastar is a great fan. If you have a later model JK 2012 or newer, just stay with the Pentastar fan because you already have it. Those Pentastar fans cost about $400, so they're not cheap. They are made by Johnson Electronics, and they are a pulse width modulated outrunner electronically speed controlled fan. It is a module, which means the fan is not only the motor but the module. Being an outrunner means it has more torque, so they run a 19-inch blade instead of a 17-inch blade that the 2-speed discrete fan runs. That bigger blade allows more airflow. We're finding closer to 4,000 CFM versus the 2,600 on the earlier fan. The larger blade also allows more air to flow through on the highway, like right now. There's more air flowing through the opening in the back of the shroud versus a 17. There's not as much blockage. So in pretty much every way, the Pentastar fan has an advantage over the discrete fan other than the cost. They cost over $400. We will set you up on an earlier JK with a harness, and we do use 8-gauge wire. These fans can draw 50, 60, even 70 amps on startup. So we do supply a heavy-duty harness and fusible link, as well as the trigger wire to control the variable speed. Now, if you have an earlier JK, you might just want to go with the Camaro fan, the SS fan. I find that it's just about as powerful, maybe a little bit more powerful than the Pentastar fan. The downside of the Camaro fan is it's not a direct drop-in on the JK, meaning the Pentastar fan drops right in pretty much any JK radiator. It is thinner than the stock fan, so you have more water pump clearance. The coolant bottle mounts right to it. You put 2 bolts in, you snap the bottom into the clips, and you're done. The Camaro fan is very similar in size, has a 19-inch blade, has a couple of flapper doors to allow better airflow, and it does fit to the JK radiator with just a little bit of fabrication, not a lot, maybe a half an hour. And the other benefit is that I do find it is a little bit quieter than the Pentastar fan, and it doesn't really require any custom tuning because we're running it basically off of the GM ECM, which is designed to run the Camaro fan. So there's advantages to both, and either the Pentastar or the Camaro SS fan is a huge step up from the discrete 2-speed fan and should last for many years. Now, one thing we like to do with the variable speed fans, we found here in Vegas that the underhood temps get very, very hot. And with a discrete fan, you basically have to let that heat build up under the hood. The fan turns on, it has to evacuate the engine compartment and pull air through the radiator, which makes it work extra hard. So this fan is cycling all the time. So with the variable speed fans, we run them at a really low speed, just idle them. And because they're ball bearing and brushless, they run for many years. Now, we don't do what the Hemi guys do and just run them at full blast, so you have to roll the window up to talk. We run them at a very low idle. In fact, you can't even hear the fan in this Jeep. And what that does is it keeps air moving through the engine compartment, and by doing that, we keep the underhood temps cool. So the fan never has to turn off, let the heat build up, turn on, move that heat out, pulling air in from a low pressure area outside the vehicle into a high pressure zone under the hood. So it allows a more constant temperature, so you don't see your temperature going up and down. It makes the fan actually work less in the long run because you'll notice the fan really never winds up, or rarely, only under a heavy load, because the evacuation mode keeps the engine cool and the air flowing through the engine compartment cool. So we just find it works out really well. And here in Vegas, when it hit 120 degrees last summer, we did extensive testing, and one of the things we found was when those fans are pulling 3,000 CFM, 40 amps, the cables, and I want to call them cables because they don't really look like a wire, they're 8-gauge, get hot, and it's almost like a winch. So we upgraded the wires on the harnesses now to 8-gauge. And even at that, please run the wires in a fire sleeve or split loom, high temp split loom, and route it away from heat exhaust, all that, of course. Basically, it's going to go right to the battery. On the earlier JKs, the tip-em powered the fans, and it had a 60 amp fuse inside the tip-em. There's just too much current going through these variable speed fans to drive them off the tip-em. So the power and ground go directly to the battery using a fusible link, and then the signal wire, the small gauge signal wire, is what controls the fan speed. And it works very well. We've been using them now for well over a year, maybe 2 years, and I must say that with our heavy-duty 52mm dual-pass radiator, there's no more cooling issues in these JKs with the LSs. I did 3 Hemi to LS conversions recently, and one of them, the customer had nothing but overheating problems constantly with his Hemi, his VVT Hemi, and he only had 37-inch tires. It was a pretty heavy JK, but pretty standard. It wasn't as heavy as the one I'm driving right now, and he overheated every year at Moab, every year at Rubicon. Here, he couldn't even drive around Vegas when it was over 100 out without melting things. So we put an LS3 in there with a variable speed fan, and needless to say, this guy's been all over and hasn't even had the temp gauge come off half. It's like it's painted on there. So he's pretty happy. You're not going to have any issues with the lower compression or the higher compression LS3 or Gen 5 LT engines with our 52mm dual pass radiator and variable speed Pentastar or Camaro SS fan. If you have a problem, there's probably something wrong with your vehicle. So that's the speech about fans. Going back to the water pumps, excuse me, the Gen 5s have a driver's side water pump on the trucks and a passenger side water pump on the LT1s or the Camaro and Corvette. We're going to support both. Having that water pump offset is actually nice because it gives us more clearance to the fan motor, especially if you're running the old DC motor, which had a long, thin motor that could hit the water pump on the truck motor, so we had to space it forward, the fan motor's forward. The Pentastar and the Camaro fan have an outrunner, so it's more of a pancake or a flat design engine, and the outer can turns instead of the inner stator. So there's a lot of advantages there. When you combine it with an LT5, it gives you plenty of room. Now the LT5 has, the LT motors have both the outlets on the driver's side, and our dual pass radiator has both the outlets on the passenger side. So we will eventually produce a radiator with the outlets on the driver's side. GM does run the hoses across the engine in a lot of applications, including their trucks, and I think they do that for a good reason. Having a hose that's too short can be a problem. Having a hose that's longer really isn't a problem, and it allows the engine to flex more, and unless that hose is pinched or up against a sharp edge or something, you shouldn't have any issues with it. The Silverados ran a hose that was about 3.5, 4 feet long from 07 all the way up through 16. So I don't think the long hose is actually an issue. It's just a matter of making it clean, and of course we're working on that. We've probably got 5 or 6 Gen 5s running now, and we're doing an L83. We hope to do an LT4 here soon. Gonna be curious to see how that goes up against a Hellcat, and the LT will eventually become more and more part of what we do. When we started doing the Gen 4 swaps back in 07, the JK was just introduced. No one was doing the Gen 4 swaps. We pioneered a lot of the conversion or hybrid technology to make the Gen 4s functional that now everybody is using. When the Gen 5s came out, we jumped on the Gen 5, and as time goes on, in a year or two, everybody else is going to get on the Gen 5 too, because it is not only going to be the motor that's going to be required for emissions compliance in the later model vehicles, but the aftermarket is going to catch up with it, and it's going to take a little time because the continuous VVT direct injection is going to take a little more time to figure out to keep these things reliable. But hey, it's the small block Chevy of today, and everybody's going to want that new technology. And we have found that these new LT motors can produce tremendous torque in the mid-range. That's one of their big advantages. The other big advantage is they can run on regular gas. So running on regular gas and having more torque under the curve is a good thing. The downside of the Gen 5s is the technology and the complexity. They're direct injected, continuous variable valve timing with an infinite phaser, enhanced airfield management. They've done away with intake manifold vacuum for a brake booster. So the trade-off for this incremental improvement in power and mileage is the technology, and what it's really going to come down to is just making it reliable, and I think GM has done that. I know that I've heard about some failures on the earlier Gen 5 LTs with some oiling issues, especially in the extreme cold, bending push rods and such, but that'll get taken care of real quick, just like GM handled the oiling issues with the Gen 4s in 7 and 8, and by 9 and 10 the Gen 4 is a very solid motor. So we're going to start seeing more LT motors in these, and we will support the accessory drive. So that's a little speech about fans and accessory drives. I'm extremely happy with this accessory drive on this Rubicon I'm driving. It has not given us a lick of issue. It's running the original GM belts, both the stretch belt for the air compressor and the main drive. So the belts are readily available. It's quiet, yet even when wet it doesn't slip or squeak. It's a really nice setup, and then when you combine that with our billet drive, it's just foolproof. I'm not sure there can be much more improvement on it. Now I will say our steel drive works just fine, and I still have a steel drive on my Jeep, so don't just rush out to get the billet drive unless you have a need for it. The billet drive could be a pain to set up. Once set up properly, it could run for the life of the vehicle. If not set up properly, you would be fighting it, just like any other belt drive that was out of alignment on a supercharger or an aftermarket. And there's some pretty goofy aftermarket accessory drives out there with high mount compressors and 120-inch belts and such. We're running an 80-something inch belt on this, and our steel drive ran a 105.5-inch belt, and we've shown that the steel drive over the years is extremely reliable if set up properly. The big advantage of the billet drive is there is no setup. You just bolt it on and it looks cool. So if you want the look cool factor, we will give you a discount on purchasing the billet drive. The trucks should be out in the next few weeks. The LS3s will follow up shortly after, and then of course the Gen 5s will come after that, and we hope by spring we'll have all three supported. Thanks.